Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the sapphire gene in ball pythons. You may not be familiar with the sapphire even though it's been out for about 11 years now. It was actually first discovered in 2009. I actually went over to Morphmarket.com, and out of the 100,000 plus ball pythons that they've had listed over there, there's only ever been 29 sapphires, which is kind of crazy. It's probably the reason that you haven't heard about it. And if you actually go over to Morphmarket.com and look through all their genes, they actually have a list of 200 plus genes. And sometimes when a gene comes out, a lot of people are actually kind of hesitant to invest in a new project. They really want to see the ultimate potential working it into other combinations. And sometimes it takes a few years to actually work that gene into combinations and show everyone, hey, this is actually worth investing in. And in some cases, with some genes, you actually work it into other combinations, and sometimes you can't tell it's actually even in there unless you look at really close, like hidden markers on the ball python. And let me tell you, when it comes to the sapphire, they can make some really amazing combinations when you mix it in with other genes. I think it's probably one of the best untapped minor genes in all of ball pythons. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you the amazing potential of the sapphire ball python gene. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com, and I want to start with this snake right here. This is just a normal, so we can see the difference between a normal, classic, wild-type ball python and the sapphire. And essentially what the normal is, it's like a snake that you'd catch in the wild if you found one over in West Africa where they originate from. And essentially what it is you actually have a lot of your normals, you'll actually have these Roswell gray alien heads on the side of the snake. And you can actually look at some of the patterns on the side because the sapphire is a really strong pattern enhancing gene, really scrambles up the pattern, which is kind of interesting. If you actually look at the top of the normal ball python too, a lot of times it's completely black or has a completely like a solid pattern through the whole snake. If you actually look at the sapphire, it actually has quite a bit of highlighting on the back of the snake. So if you actually compare the normal to the sapphire, take a look at this. This is what the sapphire looks like. And it's kind of an interesting gene. It really jumbles up the pattern on the side of the snake and brings in a lot of highlights. And when you mix it with certain genes, you can make some really amazing, sometimes really unexpected combinations working sapphire into some of the other genes. So essentially what I want to do is I wanted to take some of the genes that are like combinations or single genes and then work sapphire into it so you can kind of see before and after the ultimate effect of the sapphire working into the combination. So this is the first one I'm going to start with. Take a look at this beautiful snake. This is actually a firefly spot nose, really amazing combination. And essentially what this is the combination of the pastel and the fire, which is the firefly. And usually the pastels are really bright, and then you add fire to the pastel and you get a really super bright combination. And then you add spot nose to the mix, and a lot of times spot nose can really jumble up the pattern. Spot nose is a real strong pattern enhancing gene. So here's what happens if you take the firefly spot nose and you work in the sapphire. Take a look at this. This is kind of interesting. You get a really jumbled up pattern from the sapphire. And if you actually look at some of the pattern on the side, pretty much really kind of scrambles it up, and you get almost this pixelation in the side of the snake, which is kind of crazy, kind of an indication that you have sapphire in the mix. And as far as looking at the difference between the differences in color, I was trying to figure it out, all right, is this a dark gene or is it changing the color at all? If you actually kind of look back and forth, it almost looks like you're not changing the color as far as darkening the background in a lot of your combinations when you add the sapphire to it. So here is the butter. You may be familiar with the butter. The butter, a lot of people think, is pretty much the same thing as the lesser, and I think they're actually two different lines, the butter and the lesser. I've actually seen some butters that are a lot brighter than the lesser. I've actually seen some lessers that are a lot darker than the darkest butters, although I do think there's a lot of overlap between the butter and the lesser, and they're both in the blue-eyed leucistic complex. So if you bring them to something else, essentially you'd end up with an all-white snake with blue eyes. So sometimes you want the white snake, and sometimes people try to avoid making the white snake because it masks all the other genes in the combination, especially if you're working with sapphire, which could potentially be a really expensive gene. Right now it seems like the prices are all over the place because it's kind of undiscovered. Some of them are selling for a lot of money, and some of them have sold for relatively little compared to some of the new stuff coming on the market. So if you actually take a look at the pattern on the side of the butter, a lot of times you get kind of almost like the Roswell gray alien heads, except the eyes in the butter are completely gone in a lot of cases with the butters. And here's what happens if you work the sapphire into the butter. Take a look at this combination. This is crazy. Look what the sapphire does to that. That is pretty amazing. I can't say I've really seen any other gene that'll take just the butter, a single gene butter, and really scramble up the pattern like this. As a matter of fact, it's a little bit difficult to tell, the different versions of the butters, as far as, a really dark one and a really light one. It'd kind of be interesting to see, kind of side by side butters from the same clutch, side by side with the sapphire butter, to see if you have any darkening or any change of the color. But as far as what I can tell, as far as just the typical look of a butter, and then you add the sapphire to it, doesn't really look like it darkens it that much, which is kind of interesting. Maybe just a little bit right around some of the pattern, right on the top of the snake. So here's another one. This is kind of an interesting combination. This is actually the combination of the butter and the spider, also known as the butterbee. And it's kind of an interesting combination when you work butter and spider together. Sometimes you get this interesting effect where it almost looks axanthic sometimes, like a completely black and white snake. And a lot of times you'll actually have kind of an axanthic look, but the black is kind of this almost like a brownish black color on some of your butterbees. It's a kind of like, I guess you'd say, it's kind of the poor man's axanthic mixing butter with the spider. It's kind of an interesting effect. So if you actually add the sapphire to the butter spider, take a look at what it does to the pattern of the snake. This is kind of interesting. It really jumbles it up. I've never really seen a gene that you work into a butterbee to jumble up the pattern like this, which is kind of interesting. If you actually look at the yellow color on the side, a lot of times some of these butterbees will have some color, some yellow color on the side. I'd say this is pretty much the typical color of your butterbee, just with a really scrambled up pattern. So here is the pastel. It seems like the sapphire works really well with the pastel, which is pretty interesting. And if you actually are familiar with the pastel, essentially what it is, it's a yellow gene. It really brings out a lot of yellow in a lot of your combinations. And sometimes the pastels can jumble up the pattern a little bit. And sometimes you can actually see on this one, you kind of have these Roswell gray alien heads still on some pastels. Sometimes in some pastels, you can actually have some stripes that almost look kind of like an inchy. Sometimes the pattern will be a little bit reduced on some of your pastels. But here's what happens if you work sapphire into a pastel. Take a look at this. It really scrambles up the pattern, really jumbles it up. I'd say it's pretty close to almost what you'd see with like a confusion or an acid gene as far as really scrambling up the pattern. Although it's completely different than those, you can definitely tell in some of these combinations, it's a completely different gene that is pretty amazing when you work it with pastel. And I actually wanted to show you the super pastel when you work it in with 2 copies of the pastel. So this is a kind of an interesting example of a super pastel. Sometimes they can be really super bright, and in this case it's actually kind of almost like a coppery orange color. I've actually had some super pastels in my collection and pastels that are kind of like a reddish coppery color, which is pretty interesting. And you can actually see on a lot of your super pastels, a lot of times you'll actually have kind of the highlights up on the top of the snake, kind of like you'd see in some of your sapphire combinations. But when you actually add sapphire to the super pastel, take a look at this. This is gonna blow you away. Take a look at this crazy combination. This is just the super pastel and the sapphire working together. This one, let me tell you, I just saw this thing and I was like, all right, this is like the hidden gem in ball pythons. This is like unlike anything I've ever seen. This is completely crazy. And if you actually look at the prices on some of these, I've actually seen them anywhere from like $500. Look at this one, $550 for that, something like that. And let me tell you, if this really blew up and took off and people really invested into the sapphire, I bet these prices would really skyrocket. It's a pretty amazing gene. I actually wanted to show you one more here, and this one kind of blew my mind right at the end. So this is really interesting. So they actually put 2 snakes side by side. The top one is a pastel sapphire with 1 copy of the sapphire, and then the bottom one is a pastel super sapphires with 2 copies of the sapphire. So we think that the sapphire is actually a co-dominant gene where you can have a super form. And the weird thing about this is take a look at how dark the super is compared to 1 copy of the sapphire gene. And I can't say I've ever seen any super that's a lot darker than 1 copy of the gene. You actually work 1 copy of the sapphire in pretty much anything and you get pretty much no color effect at all. Maybe just a little bit of darkening here and there, but you actually have 2 copies of the sapphire, and it almost looks like you have blackhead or something in this mix. Blackhead is the darkest of the dark genes, and as a matter of fact, I don't even think blackhead would darken it as much as this. It's pretty amazing, pretty unique gene, especially when you're looking at the sapphire versus the super sapphire. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Brian Zientek asks, what are those blue cards on the tubs behind you? And that is a very good question. So if you actually look at this rack right behind me, I actually have blue cards on every single tub. I actually pulled one off here, and these are my feeding cards. It keeps track of feeding on all my snakes. So in every tub in the back there, I actually have room for 1 ball python in every single tub. You should definitely keep your ball pythons by themselves, 1 per tub. And when I first started in ball pythons, I was recording everything in like a spiral bound notebook, which was pretty tedious because I'd have to record everything. And then if I actually took a look at one of the snakes and I was wondering, I wonder if that snake's actually eating very good, I'd have to open up my notebook and kind of go through the pages. Versus the feeding card, what I can actually do is I can record 12 months of feeding on 1 single card. Then when I go up to the rack and look at any one tub, and just at a glance I can see how many rodents that snake has eaten in the last 12 months. It's pretty awesome, let me tell you. And essentially the way I did it, I actually used these are just like baseball card holders. I bought them over on Amazon, pretty inexpensive. I think I got a pack like 100 or 150. I think they come like 50 to a pack or something like that. And then on the back, I put some Velcro. So I have like one kind of Velcro on the back, and then I have the other type of Velcro so I can just stick them to the tub and kind of move them around with the Velcro. Makes it really easy, especially if I'm actually, kind of moving the snake around from tub to tub. I could pull it off of one and move it over to the other. Originally, I was actually thinking I could actually permanently mount these on my tubs, but let me tell you, the Velcro is a lifesaver, especially when you're cleaning tubs. You can pull all the cards off and stack the tubs and clean them real easy, which is pretty awesome. And then as far as the blue card, this is just like a 3x5 note card that I found over on Amazon. Like, you buy them in like a pack of 100. And what I did is actually made this schedule. If I can just show you, I just put it in Excel, and what it is every single month. So I have the months at the top of the row, and then I have basically 5 rows under every month. So that's the 5 weeks in that month, a maximum of 5 weeks. And then I have 3 little check marks or 3 little boxes on every week. Means I can actually feed a ball python 3 meals in a week. Usually you don't feed more than 3 meals in a week. Sometimes you actually just feed once a week, sometimes twice. And with some of my like reticulated pythons, sometimes I'll feed maybe more than 3 if they actually go back on food and they've been fasting. But usually 3 check boxes is enough per week. So essentially you can have the whole year at a glance. The only kind of limitation of this is that if you actually kind of start over the year and replace the card and you're in January, you don't really have, much information the first few months of the year. But once you get, kind of halfway into the year, then you can see, for the last few months, exactly how much the snake has been eating. It's pretty awesome. And then one of the things I found out about this card is if you actually take the card and slide it into the holder here, the card kind of disappears and you really can't grab the card. So what I did is I actually just put a little piece of Scotch tape right on the card right here as far as putting it on the card. So you definitely want to put the Velcro in the back so it hides the Velcro, and then just slide it right in and out. It's really easy. And then when I feed my snakes, what I do is I just kind of open it up a little bit, and then what I'll do is I'll just check the box if they eat the rodent, and then I'll put it back in. Makes it really super easy for feeding ball pythons. So today I want to leave you with some drone footage. I actually went to get some hay for the cows the other day. I live up here in the mountains of Colorado, and I go down to the plains of Colorado to get my grass hay. It's quite a transition going from the green mountains with a lot of trees down to the plains where it's pretty much like a desert with no trees at all. It's a pretty awesome little video that I put together. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.